The rain fell in relentless sheets, each drop adding to the muck that already clung to the battlefield. The sky was a dull gray, shrouded in a thick fog that seemed to swallow everything in sight. Only the faintest outlines of distant alien tanks and armored units could be seen, their shapes distorted by the downpour. The battlefield was a desolate wasteland, where the ground had turned to mud under the weight of endless war. It was here, amidst the chaos and rain, that the humans had set up their most daring ambush. John Hawk Walker was lying prone in the mud, his body half submerged, blending seamlessly into the terrain. His ghillie suit, soaked through by the rain, clung to his body like a second skin. Mud, water, and pieces of wet foliage covered every inch of him, making him nearly indistinguishable from the battlefield itself. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his lips as he adjusted the scope on his sniper rifle, knowing that the Galactic soldiers were too arrogant to recognize the danger they were walking into. His team was spread out across the field, equally hidden in the muck. Glenn Johnson, the sharpshooter with a temper, was positioned 200 yards to his left, his rifle aimed at the path the aliens would soon take. Adam Spectre Davis, the youngest and most eager of the group, was behind a small hill, his eyes scanning the foggy distance for any sign of movement. Hawk had trained them all well, but today was a test. The rain, the mud, the endless noise of the storm. This was no easy battlefield, but it was one that favored their particular skills. The Galactic forces had no idea what was waiting for them. "You good, Adam?" Hawk whispered into his comms, his voice steady, calm despite the tension that coiled in his gut. Adam had been eager for this mission, his first real operation in the field. It was a rite of passage, but Hawk couldn't afford any mistakes. "Yeah, just a bit of mud in my face, but nothing I can't handle," came the reply, his voice filled with the enthusiasm Hawk had come to expect from the rookie. Hawk chuckled under his breath, his gaze still locked on the distant line of enemy troops. "Just remember, kid, if you get caught, you're not getting out of here. You make a sound, you get a bullet. No exceptions." Adam's reply was a quiet affirmation. Hawk didn't need to hear the nervousness in his voice to know it was there. The rookie had a lot to learn, but Hawk had confidence. He'd seen that raw determination before, and it often led to success despite the odds. Meanwhile, Glenn was less than enthusiastic. "I don't like this," he muttered through the comms, his voice rough with irritation. "It's too quiet. They're up to something." "Relax," Hawk responded, keeping his tone light to mask his own growing concerns. "They're not that smart. They've probably never even seen a rainstorm before. It's not like they'll see us coming." The Galactic army was full of arrogance. They had no respect for the humans they were supposed to be fighting. They had underestimated Earth's forces, believing that their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers would be enough to crush any resistance. What they didn't account for was human ingenuity, the ability to adapt and outthink the enemy, to fight in ways no one expected. In the distance, the first signs of movement appeared. A line of alien soldiers, their bodies encased in sleek armor that gleamed despite the rain, trudged through the muck, unaware of the deadly eyes watching them from the shadows. Hawk's finger twitched on the trigger, but he held back. Patience was key. Jorth, the Galactic commander leading this operation, had dismissed the humans as an afterthought. His forces had been deployed in a straightforward attack, convinced that the muddy terrain would be an easy obstacle to overcome. As the human snipers lay still, hidden from view, the Galactic soldiers marched forward, their movements slow and cautious. It was almost too easy. Hawk's scope tracked Jorth's every movement as the commander barked orders to his troops, the aliens' voices muffled by the rain. They thought they were safe. Hawk could almost hear their smug laughter, their mockery of human tactics. He'd heard it all before, and he knew that by the end of the day, the Galactic forces would be regretting their overconfidence. A slight movement caught his eye. He shifted slightly, tracking the motion through the lens. A Galactic soldier had stopped, scanning the area with a look of suspicion. He wasn't the first to do so, but the others ignored him, continuing their march. Hawk's hand hovered over his rifle, waiting. "Hold your fire," he whispered to his team. His voice was calm, but inside, a storm was building. The pressure of the hunt was palpable, but this was his element. This was why he was here, why he'd survived so many battles. This was what he was good at. The soldier in front of him took another step, his foot sinking into the wet earth. Hawk's finger tightened around the trigger, and the soldier's helmet exploded in a spray of red. The body crumpled to the ground with a soft thud, the others around him oblivious to the danger. The remaining soldiers froze, looking around in confusion. Hawk's team remained silent, not moving an inch. The first kill had been made. Now, the real game began. "Glenn, take the one on the right," Hawk said quietly. His voice had a tinge of authority that left no room for debate. "Adam, stay sharp. We've got more coming." "On it," Glenn replied, his voice calm, but carrying the underlying irritation that always marked his tone before a fight. The rifle sound was muffled by the rain, but Hawk saw the second soldier drop, his body sinking into the mud. Jortha's forces were scrambling now. They had no idea where the shots were coming from. Hawk's team, positioned like ghosts in the storm, had already taken out 4 soldiers, each from a different angle, each shot precise and lethal. The Galactic soldiers didn't stand a chance. But Hawk knew it wouldn't be that easy for long. As confident as he was, he could sense the shift. The Galactic forces weren't stupid. They would figure out what was happening. And when they did, they would come for them with everything they had. It was only a matter of time. The storm continued to rage around them. But inside, Hawk felt the quiet intensity that marked the calm before the next wave of violence. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. This was just the beginning. The Galactic soldiers advanced with an air of unwarranted confidence, their boots squelching in the mud as they moved forward, unaware of the deadly figures that lay hidden in the rain-soaked muck. Jorth, the imposing alien commander leading this operation, scanned the terrain with a mixture of boredom and contempt. He had seen Earth's forces before, and they were nothing more than a nuisance. Primitive technology, crude tactics, and now, it seemed, they were resorting to hiding in the mud, hoping to catch his troops off guard. He chuckled to himself, the sound deep and guttural, like the growl of some long-forgotten beast. "These humans, they think they can hide from us with mud and rags," he muttered, his voice dripping with derision. "Pathetic." His second-in-command, a thin, wiry creature named Kelsar, raised an eyebrow. "Should we be concerned, Commander? The report said they have specialized snipers." Jorth waved him off. "Snipers? Please. The humans rely on their outdated technology and archaic tactics. If they think they can stop the Galactic Empire with simple camouflage, they've clearly lost their minds." He turned his gaze back to the horizon, where the silhouettes of his advancing soldiers could just be made out through the heavy rain. "This planet is nothing but a minor inconvenience. We'll crush them within the hour." Despite the rain, the mood within the ranks of the Galactic Army was almost jovial. The soldiers, clad in their sleek, high-tech armor, were more interested in the prospect of battle than the mud that clung to their suits. They'd been through far worse, after all. The Galactic Empire had conquered countless worlds, and Earth was just another prize waiting to be claimed. Jortha's arrogance ran deep. He had spent years climbing through the ranks, proving his superiority over lesser species. His belief in the power of the Empire was absolute, and the idea that a handful of human soldiers, hiding in the mud, could pose any real threat seemed laughable to him. The human snipers? Just a nuisance. If anything, they were an afterthought. "What's the plan, Commander?" Kelsar asked, his voice a little more urgent now, sensing the growing tension among the soldiers. Jorth paused, narrowing his eyes at the battlefield before him. He could feel something, an almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere, but he quickly dismissed it. "The plan is simple. We advance, flush out their hiding places, and crush them. Nothing more, nothing less." As they moved deeper into the mud, Jortha's words began to lose their confidence. The soldiers were still laughing, still joking with one another, but now there was a hint of unease among them. Jorth had led them into countless battles before, but something about this terrain, the endless rain, the suffocating fog, felt off. He couldn't place it, but he wasn't used to feeling this way. The first shot came from nowhere. A loud crack split the air, and one of Jortha's soldiers fell, a hole torn through his helmet. The group froze, confusion spreading like wildfire. Where did that come from? Kelsar barked, his voice high with alarm. His eyes scanned the field, trying to pinpoint the source of the attack. Jorth clenched his fist, a moment of tension passing between them. "It doesn't matter," he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it had earlier. "Keep moving. They're not ghosts. They'll reveal themselves soon enough." But the humans didn't reveal themselves. The soldiers kept advancing, their movements slower now, more cautious. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the quiet punctuated only by the soft patter of rain and the occasional crack of distant thunder. A second shot rang out. Another soldier dropped, this time a clean hit through the chest. Panic began to spread through the ranks. "They're out there," Kelsar said, his voice tight. "We need to regroup. This is madness." Jortha's mind raced, his previous confidence slipping away. He could feel the presence of the enemy, just beyond the edges of his vision, just out of reach. There were no signs, no footprints, no tracks. Nothing. The humans had vanished into the very elements they were fighting against. The mud, the rain, the fog, all worked in their favor. He glanced around, realizing that the soldiers around him were starting to panic. The calm, controlled soldiers he had once commanded with ease were now on edge, eyes darting around nervously, scanning every movement in the rain. They were realizing what Jorth had ignored, that this was no ordinary battlefield. The sniper shots kept coming, each one more precise than the last, each one striking from an angle the Galactic soldiers could never anticipate. Jortha's soldiers were falling, one by one, and they still had no idea where the attackers were. "What's happening?" Jorth spat, his voice rising with frustration. "Where are they hiding?" "They're everywhere," Kelsar said, his voice shaking. "The humans, their ghosts, Commander." The realization hit Jorth like a slap in the face. The humans weren't just hiding. They were masters of the terrain, using it to their advantage in ways the Galactic Army had never anticipated. They were blending into the environment, becoming one with the mud, the rain, the very battlefield itself. They were invisible to all but their targets. His grip on his weapon tightened, his frustration bubbling over. "We cannot let them win. Do you hear me? We will find them, and we will destroy them." But with every word, his authority seemed to wane. His soldiers were beginning to lose faith. Another shot rang out, and yet another soldier fell. It was as though the human snipers were toying with them, picking them off at will. Jorth clenched his teeth, his mind racing. He had underestimated the humans. He had underestimated their ingenuity, their ability to survive and adapt. The idea that these primitive soldiers could outsmart the might of the Galactic Empire was laughable. Until now. "We need to regroup," Kelsar urged. "We need to call for reinforcements. This isn't a fight we can win alone." Jortha's jaw clenched. "No, we will not retreat. Not like this. Not with the enemy hiding like cowards." But his words fell flat. The Galactic soldiers were now fully aware that they were being hunted, that the very terrain they had once believed to be a disadvantage was now working against them. The arrogance that had once fueled them began to falter, replaced by the cold, bitter sting of fear. Another shot, another soldier down. Jortha's gaze swept across the field once more. His soldiers were disoriented, on edge, and he knew that if this continued, they would break. His forces were formidable, but they were not prepared for this kind of warfare. The humans had turned the battlefield into their playground, and it was a game the Galactic Army was losing. As the shots continued to fall, Jortha's thoughts swirled in panic. The humans were not just hiding, they were hunting. And now, it was only a matter of time before they came for him. The storm continued its unrelenting assault on the battlefield, the rain blurring the outlines of the alien forces as they struggled to regain their composure. The mud sucked at their boots, the fog cloaking their movements, but it was the humans who had turned this environment into a deadly advantage. Jortha's forces were no longer advancing with the same confidence they had before. The steady stream of casualties was wearing them down, eroding their resolve. Jorth stood at the forefront, his teeth bared in a snarl. He had spent years climbing the ranks of the Galactic Army, but now, in the face of these relentless human snipers, his reputation seemed to be crumbling. He could hear the panic in his soldiers' voices as they struggled to make sense of their mounting losses. "Regroup," Jorth barked. "We need to find them now. They can't be far." But it was easier said than done. The human snipers seemed to be everywhere and nowhere all at once. Jortha's forces were becoming more disorganized with each passing minute. They couldn't tell where the shots were coming from, nor how to counter them. The terrain, which had once seemed like an advantage, now felt like a trap. Hawk, lying still in the muck, surveyed the scene through his scope. His breathing was slow, controlled, each inhale and exhale perfectly timed. His team was in place, spread out in the mud like ghosts, blending into the battlefield. He had been watching Jorth for some time, waiting for the right moment to strike. The rookie, Adam, was crouched behind a small ridge, his rifle aimed at a cluster of galactic soldiers. Hawk could see the tension in his movements. The kid was eager, but that eagerness often led to mistakes. Hawk had seen it too many times before. He needed Adam to be calm, to understand that this wasn't just about taking a shot. It was about surviving. "Adam," Hawk's voice crackled over the comms, calm yet firm. "Steady your aim. Don't rush it." There was a brief pause before Adam responded. "Got it, Hawk. I'm just waiting for the right moment." Hawk nodded, though Adam couldn't see it. The rookie had promise, but he needed to learn the value of patience. This was a deadly game they were playing, and there was no room for errors. From his vantage point, Hawk could see Glenn moving through the mud, his silhouette barely visible in the downpour. Glenn was more experienced than Adam, but his impatience often got the best of him. Today, however, he was on task, moving with precision as he set up his shot. The Galactic soldiers, on the other hand, were growing desperate. They were moving in tighter formations now, their once proud arrogance replaced by a sense of fear that was palpable in the air. Jorth paced at the head of his group, barking orders to regroup and refocus. But the damage had been done. His soldiers had lost their nerve. Hawk didn't take his eyes off the field. He could see them now, the flickers of movement as Jortha's troops tried to adjust. They were too slow, too obvious. A sniper's dream. He focused on the target in front of him, a soldier who had just come into view, unaware of the death waiting for him. Hawk's finger tightened on the trigger, and the shot rang out. The soldier's helmet shattered, and he crumpled to the ground with a muffled thud. Another one down. The panic was instant. Jortha's soldiers scattered, but the humans were already one step ahead. Hawk shifted his position, moving silently through the mud to a new vantage point. He needed to stay mobile. If the aliens started to get wise to his position, they might start looking in the right places. "Keep it tight," Hawk said to his team, his voice smooth and authoritative. "No more mistakes." Glenn responded almost immediately, his voice steady. "I've got eyes on two more. They're moving in a group. Take them out," Hawk ordered. "But only when you're sure." The shots were muffled by the rain, but Hawk could see the results through his scope. The first soldier dropped with a perfect hit to the chest. The second was quicker, trying to take cover behind a tank, but it was no use. Glenn had already lined up the shot, and the soldier didn't stand a chance. "They're starting to get wise," Glenn muttered over the comms. "They're trying to hide behind their tanks now. We'll need to be careful." Hawk considered Glenn's words, eyes scanning the battlefield. The aliens were adapting, and that was dangerous. If they started to use their surroundings to their advantage, it would make it harder to get close enough for the shots to count. Hawk's team needed to stay unpredictable, keep the pressure on. "Stay on them," Hawk said. "Don't give them time to think." But as the rain intensified, Hawk could sense something else. The aliens were starting to fight back in ways they hadn't before. He could hear the faint whir of their advanced weapons activating, their weapons designed to counter human tactics. They weren't using their rifles. They were using something heavier, something meant to flush out snipers. "Hawk, we've got a problem." Adam's voice came through, strained. "They've got some kind of pulse weapons. It's affecting my scope." Hawk's eyes narrowed, and his hand instinctively moved toward his own rifle, adjusting the settings. He could hear the low hum of the pulse weapon in the distance, growing louder as it charged. "Stay low. Stay out of sight," Hawk ordered, his voice hard. "They're trying to flush us out. Don't give them anything." The pulse weapons were designed to disrupt electronic equipment, heat signatures, scopes, comms. It was a gamble, but Hawk had expected something like this. The Galactic forces weren't stupid. They were using their technology to force the humans into a corner. Adam's voice crackled again, more urgent this time. "I can't see them anymore. The pulse is messing with my sight." "Move," Hawk said. "Get to a new position. I'll cover you." There was a brief pause, and then Adam responded, his voice steadier now. "On it." Hawk could see him shift through the mud, moving toward a small rise in the terrain where the pulse weapon couldn't reach. It was a risk, but the kid had learned quickly. If they didn't keep moving, they would become sitting ducks. "Glenn, how are you holding up?" Hawk asked, keeping his tone neutral, though he could feel the tension building. The Galactic army was getting more aggressive. "I'm good. Got another one," Glenn responded, the hint of satisfaction in his voice. "But they're starting to react faster. They're moving in groups now. We need to adjust." The hunt was intensifying. The Galactic forces were now aware of their mistakes, aware that they were being systematically picked off by humans who could blend into the environment better than anyone could have imagined. It was a game of cat and mouse, and the humans were in control. For now. But Hawk knew that Jorth and his soldiers wouldn't give up so easily. The Galactic army would adapt, just as the humans had, and the next wave of attacks would come fast and hard. Hawk's grip tightened on his rifle as the battlefield shifted. The real challenge was just beginning. The storm raged on, a cacophony of rain and thunder that seemed to shake the very earth beneath them. Hawk's heart raced, but his movements remained steady, controlled. He could feel the tension in the air, a heaviness that pressed in on him, as though the entire battlefield were holding its breath. His team had fought for hours, picking off Galactic soldiers one by one, using the terrain, the mud, and the rain to their advantage. But now, as the enemy forces regrouped, something had shifted. The Galactic army wasn't retreating. They were adapting, and with each passing minute, the odds were beginning to turn against them. Jorth stood at the forefront of his remaining troops, his eyes narrowed in frustration. His once cocky demeanor had been replaced by the grim determination of a commander who was starting to realize just how dangerous this battle had become. He barked orders to his soldiers, directing them to fan out and use the remaining cover to protect themselves. The pulse weapons had done their job, disrupting the human snipers' equipment, but they hadn't won the battle. Not yet. "Find them," Jorth commanded, his voice like steel. "They're here. Somewhere. I want them dead." Hawk's lips twitched into a faint smile as he adjusted his position. Jorth's arrogance had been his downfall, and now it was time to finish what they had started. The Galactic forces were on edge, disorganized and desperate. The humans had made their mark, and Hawk wasn't about to let it slip away. He glanced over at Glenn and Adam, both hidden in their positions, waiting for a signal. The rookies had come a long way since their first battle. Adam was no longer the eager, uncertain sniper who had once needed constant guidance. His movements were deliberate, his eyes sharp as he scanned the battlefield for any sign of movement. Glenn, though still prone to irritation, had grown more focused, more deadly. Hawk had seen it in their eyes, the change. They were no longer just soldiers following orders. They were hunters, too. But even now, as they lay hidden in the mud, Hawk could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him. If they were to survive, he would have to lead them through this final storm. "Focus," Hawk whispered over the comms, his voice low and steady. "No more mistakes. This ends tonight." Adam's voice crackled back. "Got it, Hawk. We're ready." The Galactic soldiers were moving with more caution now, their formation tighter as they crept through the rain-soaked terrain. But they were vulnerable. They didn't know where the humans were, and that made them predictable. Hawk's team knew their every move, could anticipate their next step with deadly precision, and the Galactic forces didn't stand a chance. Suddenly, a shot rang out from a distance, followed by another. Jortha's soldiers flinched, looking around in panic. They were being picked off again, but this time, the shots were closer, faster, and far more lethal. Glenn had opened fire, and the first 2 soldiers fell. The rest of the Galactic troops scattered, trying to find cover, but it was already too late. "Move!" Jorth shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. "We need to flush them out. Now!" But Hawk and his team were already moving. With one swift motion, Hawk rose from his position, disappearing into the storm. His steps were silent, calculated, each one taken with the kind of precision that only years of training could create. He had one target in mind, Jorth, the leader, the source of the Galactic force's arrogance. If they could take him down, the rest would crumble. Adam and Glenn followed suit, each one moving like shadows, blending into the battlefield, taking cover behind the ruined remains of alien vehicles and tanks. The Galactic soldiers, now completely disoriented, were no match for the speed and skill of the human snipers. Hawk could hear their voices in the distance, frantic, pleading for backup, but it was too late. As Hawk neared Jortha's position, he could see the commander, his back turned, barking orders to his remaining soldiers. Hawk's heart raced as he raised his rifle, aiming for the alien's head. One shot. That's all it would take. The tension in his fingers was unbearable, but Hawk held steady. He had been in worse situations before. He had taken down more dangerous enemies. This was nothing. But just as he was about to pull the trigger, something shifted. The rain intensified, and in the blink of an eye, Hawk felt a sharp sting in his side. A pulse weapon, he gasped, his body slamming against the wet ground as the world around him spun. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might lose consciousness. But then he heard it, Glenn's voice, a low growl, filled with rage. "Hawk, get up!" The Galactic forces had found them. Jorth, no longer unaware of their presence, had deployed his pulse weapon, hoping to flush them out of hiding. But Hawk wasn't going down that easily. Through sheer will, he fought against the disorienting effects of the weapon, pushing himself to his knees. His rifle was still in his hands, the target still in his sights. But this time, he wouldn't make the same mistake. He wouldn't hesitate. "Take the shot!" Glenn shouted. Hawk's finger tightened on the trigger, and the world seemed to freeze. Time slowed. Jortha's head snapped back, the bullet hitting him dead center. The alien commander crumpled to the ground without a sound, his body collapsing in the mud. The remaining soldiers paused. They looked around, as though searching for some sign of hope, but all they found was the deafening silence of their leader's death. "Fall back!" One of the soldiers screamed, but it was too late. Glenn and Adam had already moved in, picking off the remaining troops with deadly accuracy. Hawk, still struggling to stay upright, could see the panic in their eyes as they realized they were surrounded. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and completely outclassed. In the distance, the sound of reinforcements could be heard, but it was a faint hope, a final, desperate attempt to salvage their doomed mission. The Galactic soldiers, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves running for their lives, unable to escape the swift vengeance of the human snipers. As the last of the soldiers fell, the storm finally began to subside, the rain letting up just enough for Hawk to see the battlefield clearly. The muddy field was littered with the bodies of the galactic forces, and for the first time in hours, there was a brief moment of calm. Hawk dropped to his knees, his body aching, his breath ragged. He could hear Glenn and Adam approaching, but for a moment, he let himself simply breathe. He had done it. They had done it. "You good?" Glenn asked, his voice softer now, laced with genuine concern. Hawk nodded, though it was a struggle. "Yeah, we're good." Adam crouched beside him, his eyes wide with admiration. That was incredible. "You were right, Hawk. They never saw it coming." Hawk let out a slow breath. "They never do." As the last of the galactic forces retreated, the human snipers stood victorious. The battle was over. The Galactic Empire had underestimated them, and now they would never forget the lesson. The humans, with their simple tactics, their camouflage, and their unshakable resolve, had proven that they were a force to be reckoned with. And in the end, it was the arrogance of the Galactic Army that had sealed their fate. The storm finally cleared, and the sun began to rise over the battlefield, casting a pale light over the mud and blood-soaked earth. Hawk and his team stood, battered but unbroken, ready for whatever came next.